faithful fans, fellow musicians, and Figgy Duff alumni. Over the years, most of the province's top traditional musicians played with the Duff. Many of them reunited for this occasion, with one notable exception, founder Noel Dinn. A Celtic rocker ahead of his time, Dinn's driving rhythms on drums and bodhrán drove the band until his untimely death from cancer in July of '93.
His energy and drive, I mean, I still miss that, you know, I mean, that kind of determination and some people would say pig-headedness, but it's unusual. You don't find people with that amount of drive and passion. I've never seen it in anybody else.
Pamela Morgan was the lead singer with Figgy Duff. She was just 16 years old when Dinn spotted her in a play in Grand Falls and persuaded her to hit the road.
What are you doing, Ellie?
To explore the province's nooks and crannies in search of the Celtic connections.
Before I leave the land.
And thus began a kind of musical mission, a shared vision that grew, intensified, and embraced the full spectrum of ancient traditions. It was a musical journey that took them around the world. Through Figgy Duff, Newfoundland's Celtic roots were brought back to Europe and introduced to the United States at heritage festivals like this one in New Orleans. It was taken to the streets in Montreal and other Canadian cities, and it was celebrated in fine style at home.
Well, I lived and breathed Figgy Duff for, you know, well, for almost 20 years, and it's almost too early to say. I mean, I still feel like, you know, well, I'm left-handed, so my left arm is cut off. I just feel as if, you know, I still haven't fully recovered from the fact that, I mean, when we were doing Figgy Duff, it was something you never thought was going to end, you know, and we just, when I started, and even as I got older, I mean, I just felt sort of immortal, really, and you don't ever think that it's going to close, you know.
It lasted nearly 20 years, boasted as many members, and released 4 albums. After the Tempest, Figgy Duff, Weather Out the Storm, and finally, Downstream. But Morgan says Downstream was not the most fitting farewell.
Downstream was, well, in my opinion, a great album, but it's very, very somber, and it's very dark, and it was, in a lot of ways, it was a final statement for Noel, and he knew that. But it didn't sort of project the joy that a lot of Figgy Duff's music had, and there was no traditional music on it. So I didn't feel it was a proper album to close on.
So the Retrospective album, like its launch, blended the best of Figgy Duff's work, featuring the talents of members who contributed along the way.
It's not so much a memory, because it's something that still lives. It's a feeling of having participated through a piece of Newfoundland's history musically, having been part of a band from its roots and seeing it now 20 years later being celebrated. It's a great sense of having been a part of it, you know, a sense of pride.
And the Celtic tradition has been firmly established now across the country, primarily due to the efforts of Figgy Duff. In the midst of the current revival of roots music, it's hard to imagine that 20 years ago, Figgy Duff stood alone, refusing to quit. And because of that, current traditional hotshots like Great Big Sea have had an easier time of it.
It's because of the groundwork that had been laid by so many good East Coast bands, like Figgy Duff, like, you know, like the Irish Descendants, like ourselves, like Rollins Cross, you know, all these bands that are, you know, forging on to make this music accessible to all ages.
Likewise, the nationally acclaimed Irish Descendants. After Noel Dinn's funeral, Darcy Broderick acknowledged the music community's debt.
He was certainly missed for what he did He's brought the music across the world to the world stage, and I guess we're going to have to keep up his good work.
But Figgy Duff's impact extended far beyond traditional borders to other realms, including reggae and various alternative styles, even to other generations. Younger musicians who never actually heard the band, only of them.
Figgy Duff blazed trails that you wouldn't be able to assess what they've done for bands that are come from Newfoundland after them, following along the paths, just to make people in the world stand up, take recognition of any musical talent coming out of Newfoundland is what they did, and they blazed those trails, knocked down a lot of barriers, and for the amount of years short that they may be that Noel Dinn lived, he's probably added years to people like me and my life that don't have to maybe knock down so many hard doors because they're already knocked down by Noel Dinn and Figgy Duff.
Well, I mean, Figgy Duff were, without even having to hear their music, there's a certain association that Figgy Duff had with them that for any musician in Newfoundland is really important. You look at the ultimate independent success story, real grassroots support, building up a band, touring base, and all that kind of stuff. They just kind of proved that being a musician in Newfoundland, you can make it.
It lets me know that we at least somehow accomplished what we set out to do in the beginning, which was to make Newfoundland music more aware to a broader spectrum of people. And that all those really rough, raunchy tours we did in the back of the van across the country and back and forth wasn't in vain.
And so, with a final fling, Figgy Duff, the band, is put to rest. But the music lives on, and the spirit which found an instrument in Figgy Duff continues to find expression in those who treasure the past enough to make it part of the future. But there is life after Figgy Duff. The members have all gone on to form other bands, including Pamela Morgan, who plans to release her first solo CD in the new year. And speaking of first CDs, a fisherman from Petty Harbor is out to prove there's life after cod as he trades fish. Dermot O'Reilly has been part of the Newfoundland music scene for nearly 30 years. So news of his recent heart attack prompted a heartfelt response from fellow musicians. Apparently, one of the biggest benefits of the local music scene is how musicians always band together for one of their own.
Well, I'm ready for you. I hope you're ready for me.
And that's it in a nutshell. The insurance policy of the Newfoundland musician. The benefit concert. The support of your pairs when times get tough.
You need the money to keep your mortgage going, or you're putting food on the table for your family, and if you're a musician, you don't have that luxury most of the time, and so these kind of benefits are just fantastic, you know.
And Dennis Parker should know, himself a transplanted musician from England. A few years ago, it was his heart attack, his benefit concert, his bills.
I think it's very special in that way because people are so close together and closely knit that it's wonderful that something like this today is going to, you know, make it much easier for Dermot to get through the next few months, you know.
Dermot O'Reilly has been a mainstay of the music scene since 1967. An Irish import with such groups as Ryan's Fancy and the Sons of Erin. In recent years, he's pursued a solo career that includes both studio and video production. And over the years, he's done his share of benefits, shared the stage with most of the province's musicians. And most, it seemed, turned out to return the favor. Friends Fergus O'Byrne, Jim Joyce and Kelly Russell were on deck to lend their respective hands to the occasion and voice their concern.
The reason that we've all come together today is to put together a benefit for Dermot O'Reilly. Now you all heard that Dermot had a heart attack just before New Year's Eve, and I've been up to see him in the hospital. He's coming along, but we got to give him some time, and hopefully this will give him some money to help him along for a couple of months till he gets back on his feet.
Meanwhile, these feet were in fine form. A revamped version of Tickle Harbor turned up to give its support, as did one half of Rollins Cross, otherwise known as the Panting Brothers, along with drummer Philip Dinn. For Dinn, and for Pamela Morgan, the evening was a poignant reminder of another concert 4 years ago for the late Noel Dinn of Figgy Duff.
It has to be this way because no one else is going to help us, really, unless we help each other. So it's great like that. And I just still think that the spirit is one of the most important aspects of the whole thing.
Let me see the golden rain.
Phyllis Morrissey agrees. She and Dermot go back a long way musically. She says it's a shock when something like this happens to one of your contemporaries, but a benefit helps the road to recovery.
Because when they know that so many people are out rooting for them and caring for them, I mean, it's got to have a great effect on the heart, right? It's healing.
For younger musicians, like the lads in Connemara, heart attacks and other illnesses may seem a long way off. But theirs is an uncertain existence anyway, and this kind of insurance is encouraging.
It's nice to see everybody pulling together when one of us is in need, so I don't mind doing something like this for another musician because the day might come when I'll need it.
And even as benefit concerts go, this one was extraordinary. So many musicians offered their help that 2 venues had to be used simultaneously. Close to 700 people showed up throughout the evening, and several $1,000s were raised.
I think that it's special because it's small, and we're probably closer knit than a lot of other larger centers. And, well, there's not a lot of work around, so people are usually available. If there's a benefit on the go, there's a lot of musicians who would be available.
So it's a pretty risky business financially. Why do you keep doing it?
With me, I think it's a calling. I can't give it up. It's a calling.
And that's good news for local audiences who say an evening like this makes sense any way you look at it.
But the most appreciative of all was Dermot O'Reilly himself, who sent thanks from the hospital. Overwhelmed with the outpouring of affection, he claims that despite all that has happened, he still believes he's a very lucky person. And that's intermission for Tuesday. We'll see you again on Friday.
I know a lot of his fans are wishing Dermot well, and just wanted to point out that we said at the beginning of Deborah's intermission that Dermot had been a member of the Irish Rovers. Wrong. He did play with a number of groups, but we certainly remember him very well for Ryan's Fancy.
He was a rover from Ireland, no question about that.
That too.
Last week, Deborah Collins reported on Rising Tide's Review 95, and tonight, theater critic Peter Gard tells us what he thinks of the show.
Rising Tide's annual review is like a sick uncle. Some years it gets better, some years it sinks to the very edge of death. However, the review never dies and leaves you its money. It never actually recovers and becomes fun. Now the real fun comes from watching the audience. At halftime, everyone compares notes. Not as bad as I thought it was going to be. Yeah, I heard it's going to be 10 times worse. Anyone with even a remote chance of getting skewered shows up looking glum, like they're waiting for the x-rays from the dentist. Of course, what they're really desperately afraid of is that they won't get mentioned. Like poor Jack Harris this year, John Murphy, Andy Wells, Lynn Verge even only got a tiniest nod. One has to wonder what hideous offense they committed in 1995 to be left out of the review. I caught Miller Eyre and Susan Shirk rushing into the second half, hoping that the Cabot 500 Corporation might rate 2 skits. No such luck. John Efford removing the wing nuts from snowplows was far more important. 1995 was a banner year for idiocy, and it was hard not to be hopeful that the review might pick up on this. Churches claiming Uncle Clyde was going to cancel Christmas. A new bloom on John Murphy thanks to Sheila Guy. Cabot 500. Brian Tobin, Lynn Verge. They're pretty funny. But with an unerring sense of the jugular, this year's review went for John Efford and Loyola Sullivan. You can do either of them with an old dirt mop for a wig and the same crooked accent.